It's the simplest expression. The smallest thing that changes everything. A smile. So easy. A smile lights it up. Apologizes. And welcomes unconditionally. Because the shortest distance between two people is a smile.
Thank you.
Hy-Vee, where there's a helpful smile in every aisle.
Getting the right nutrition is essential to achieving and maintaining good health. Yet accessing balanced meals that also support health challenges and fulfill personal tastes is not always as easy as it should be. At Mom's Meals, our passion is to provide nourishment and deliver wholesome meals to the homes of those who need better nutrition to support their health and wellness, no matter where they live. It's the reason we've built our business from our own personal roots, caring for our clients as we do our own family and loved ones. Our menus are designed by professional chefs and registered dietitians to taste great and support the nutritional needs of common health conditions. Clients get to choose every meal, every order. Meals are delivered to any address, no matter how remote. Simply place your order, receive your delivery, heat, and enjoy. To learn more or view the wide variety of refrigerated meals available, visit momsmeals.com.
Hello and welcome to Iowa Stops Hunger, our ongoing series about food insecurity and some of the solutions to feed more people here in Iowa and beyond. My name is Michael Moraine. I'm the editor of DSM Magazine, and together with the Business Record, we published this series to raise awareness about food and food solutions. We are grateful for support from our presenting sponsor, Hy-Vee, as well as supporting sponsors Mom's Meals and the Principal Foundation. Their support allows us to dig a little deeper and interview experts like our guest today. Dr. Pamela Riney-Kehrberg is a distinguished professor of history at Iowa State. And we're bringing her in today partly because she teaches several courses at least one course on food history. And over the years, she has tackled this subject from different angles. A few years ago, she also wrote a book called When a Dream Dies, Agriculture, Iowa, and the Farm Crisis in the 1980s. And today we want to zero in on that decade, which lots of Iowans know from personal experience was a really tough one here in Iowa. And necessity is often the mother of invention. So during that time when people were struggling, lots of leaders came up with solutions to try to figure out how to feed more people who were struggling. So Pam, welcome. Let's set the scene a little bit. Just take us back to the 1980s for people who lived through it and for people who weren't around. What were some of the economic factors that were going on then that created the crisis?
The 1980s were a really desperate decade for farmers in Iowa. The problem had very long roots. Probably the most important part of it was that Iowa farmers and America's farmers can produce far more food than the United States can consume. And what happened in the 1970s was really critical to what happens in the 1980s. In the 1970s, the United States begins all-out production. What happens is that the United States Department of Agriculture tells farmers that it is important that they basically plow from fence row to fence row and that they get big or get out. That's a direct quotation from Earl Butz, who was the chairman of the United States Department of Agriculture. And a lot of land goes into production ramps up, and a lot of farmers take out debt in order to do that. It's highly encouraged by banks, highly encouraged by extension. Interest rates were very, very low. Inflation was very high. And everybody thought, okay, if we're going to spend money, if we're going to improve our farm, now is the time to do it, because God isn't going to make any more land and they can't see an end to the inflation. And everybody tells them, go ahead and make the investments. And that would have been okay if the situation had stayed as it was. but it doesn't. And probably the most important thing that doesn't stay as it was is interest rates. These farmers had adjustable rate mortgages, and they were not prepared for interest rates to go as high as 24% at times. And those interest rates mean that it is more economically uh, lucrative to put your money into a CD or a money market than to buy land. And so land values tank. In every single county in Iowa, the value of land falls between 60 and 70% by 1985. That's in the course of 4 years, because land values peak in 81 and then they have this incredible fall off, which means that all of these farmers who have borrowed money against their land are upside down on their loans. Their loans are far more valuable, they're worth more money than the land that they borrowed against. And so there is a wave of foreclosures that begins in the early 1980s and continues throughout the decade. And about a third of Iowa farmers they're okay. They're usually older farmers, people who are more conservative, didn't take out debt. There's another third that are facing significant problems. They're probably not going to lose their land tomorrow, but they're worried. And then there's the final third who are in imminent danger of losing their land. So 2/3 of the farming population in this state was in significant trouble during that decade.
And here in Iowa, obviously, there's so many ripple effects to that. Even in big cities, we're all stitched together pretty tightly
Right.
here in Iowa. So there must have been. I'm sure you found ripple effects in small towns and schools and nonprofits and churches trying to figure out
Right.
how to help people through this. What were some of the solutions that people offered to help not only farmers, but the communities that were struggling through just a really, really tough time? What were some of the solutions that popped up?
Okay. Um, well, before I head into that,
Sure.
I did want to say that this was the whole food crisis surrounding the farm crisis
Hmm.
really puzzled people,
Hmm.
because they thought, okay, farmers are in trouble, but farmers have pigs,
Hmm.
farmers have gardens, farmers can feed themselves. What they didn't realize was that agriculture had changed. Many farmers just produced for the market,
Right.
and many of them had loans against those pigs. And so they couldn't kill them. Or, they were sending someone off the farm to work and there was no time for a garden.
Hmm.
And so I was really stunned. I probably shouldn't have been, but I was really stunned by the fact that there's this enormous food crisis,
Hmm.
food insecurity that goes with the farm crisis. And it's happening in small towns.
It seems
It's
like
happening.
such a cruel irony that here
Yes,
in the heart of the heartland in the Midwest, we're not producing enough food to feed ourselves. But you're right, the whole system had changed, and I bet
right.
that mindset was a big part of that challenge too.
Yes. Well, there are all kinds of letters to the Des Moines Register saying, I don't understand. How could farmers possibly be hungry? Farmers getting food stamps? Are you kidding me? And one of the solutions is that farmers begin to get food stamps, and it's front page news
Hmm.
in the Des Moines Register that farmers are getting food stamps. They changed the eligibility rules in the 1980s. Normally, farmers would have been ineligible because they own large amounts of property, but they realize that they are not actually earning money on that property. And so they become eligible for food stamps. The problem is that many of them are too proud, too embarrassed to actually take food stamps. And one of the really important things that happens is that the Iowa Farm Unity Coalition, which was a coalition of lots and lots of left-leaning agricultural organizations, begins what they call food stamp drives. where they ask everybody in the community to stand in line, whether they think they need food stamps or not. They want everybody to stand in line to sign up for food stamps so that the people who really need them will not feel ashamed. So they want the minister in line. They want the banker in line. They want the teachers, the principal at the high school. And they managed to get a fair number of Iowa farmers enrolled in the food stamp program, um, but nowhere near as many as probably needed it, because there is this really big barrier of pride in there that's keeping people from signing up. But what I really loved about what I saw was that there were people like the leaders in the Iowa Farm Unity Coalition who said, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to let pride get in my way. And probably one of the most important people in that was Denise O'Brien, who is very, I mean, she's been very active in farm politics since the 1980s. She went on record saying, I am doing this embarrassing thing. I can't believe I'm doing this embarrassing thing, but I am doing it, and you need to do this for your own families. There's a story in Ladies' Home Journal about her accepting food stamps. And that's really important because it gets other people who might not have done what they needed to do what they have to do. And I think that is incredibly important. This going public aspect of the problem,
Hmm.
not being ashamed.
Was the learning curve steep here in Iowa? I'm sure other states had, certainly on the coast, they had no idea. But here in Iowa, were big city folks unaware that the farming system had changed, that there was this mindset gap?
I think there are a lot of people who are unaware of that because you get these floods of letters into the Des Moines Register. And, on the one hand, there are letters from farm people trying to explain why this is happening. There are also letters from older farm people saying, we lived through the Great Depression. How come you can't deal with this? And they don't understand that in the Great Depression, the biggest expense that farmers had was labor. And you could shift your family, your extended family around and cover those problems. But when your biggest expense is paying debt, that is a completely different thing. And, so there's just, a, there's this constant level of not understanding what's going on. Everybody knows there's a problem and they see it constantly on the news, in the papers, but they don't understand how it happened and they don't understand why it's not easily fixable. I
In
mean,
addition, I'm curious, in addition to newspapers, what were some of your best sources to unearth some of these stories?
oh, all kinds of sources. Denise O'Brien's papers over at the Iowa Women's Archives in Iowa City. We have the records of a number of advocacy organizations here at Iowa State, newspapers, high school yearbooks, which strangely enough, we're also recording some of this stuff.
Like what?
I
Like how did the farm crisis land? How did it show up in high school yearbooks?
Most of the time it's just in a little tiny bit of commentary about things being difficult, but there is a wonderful yearbook from Harlan High School, Harlan Community High School, that was published in 1985 that goes into great detail about how this is just ripping their community apart. I managed to track down the woman who edited that yearbook, and she said that they went to the Iowa Writers Workshop and they had this idea that they could write a better story than just a yearbook about how good the football team is in Harlan. And so they decided basically on every page that they were going to address this problem. Now, probably the place where I got the best sources, certainly the most, was Terry Branstad's papers. I was the first historian who was allowed into his papers, and there are thousands of constituent letters telling all kinds of stories about how hard that decade was. And the letters, some of them are from 6-year-olds, and some of them are from 86-year-olds, and everything in between. And it's just heartbreaking.
I'm curious, what are some of the lessons from that era that have stuck? Are we still in the same kind of peril or danger, or are there safety nets that are built in, or lessons that we have learned that might help us avoid a situation like that in the future?
I think people are still very stubborn about taking help, although there are more networks in place by way of the extension to try and deal with those. Extension had never dealt with mental health before the 1980s. They deal with it now. And should we have a crisis that's as severe, they will, well, even before we do, they will step in and start talking about mental health support and getting people signed up for the help they need. Another thing that happens during the 1980s that is entirely voluntary is the creation of food banks all across this state.
So
And
those did not exist before the 1980s?
nope, there
Okay.
are a few in urban areas, but all of the small town food banks are the creation of the
Mm.
1980s. Often the creation of a local minister who
Right.
decided that something had to happen, or a local women's group that decided people had to be fed.
Mm-hmm.
And they open up in closets in churches, in empty buildings in downtowns. Those programs largely date back to the 1980s. And again, it can be difficult getting people to make use of those resources, but they become much more open about the help they're offering. Another great Iowa program that starts during the 1980s is Food for Life, which distributes meat to food banks. It began in the 1980s with a farmer who had a pig that was not suitable for commercial slaughter. It had broken a leg, and he already had, you weren't allowed to commercially slaughter animals that had injuries. They already had their own hog in the freezer for that year. So he thought, well, what can I do with this? And he had it slaughtered, and he gave the meat to um, a local after school program that was feeding kids. And he thought, this is kind of interesting. Maybe this is something bigger. And they begin gleaning animals from farmers that could spare them, having those animals slaughtered, um, using donations to have those animals slaughtered, and distributing the meat to food pantries. We still have that program today, except today they glean from the food processors.
Oh, sure.
They
Yeah.
get meat from Tyson, they get meat from the various plants around the state, and then distribute it to food programs, um, a lot of them in rural areas. So that kind of volunteer network.
Right. There's some of the solutions, and I think this is the case for lots of challenges, that folks they're doing what they're already doing, but they see one opportunity to do a little bit more, or to alter what they're doing
Yep.
just a little bit in a way that helps other people. My uncle works with a program in Sioux City called Grow Another Row, where he was already gardening,
Yes.
but the idea
Yes.
is that you plant a little bit more and donate your surplus. It does not surprise me that Iowans think like that. Many of us are hardwired to just keep producing and share
Right.
what we have. But so much of this history does not go back, certainly as far as I realized. I just figured, food pantries have always been around,
No.
but it's interesting that
Nope.
many of them emerged in the 1980s.
Yep.
Um,
They are direct responses to what was happening in communities then, and they still exist. I mean, Loaves and Fishes in Story City started in the 1980s. It's still there today. Um, Now, one of the things that I discovered that I loved the best of all of the sources about food insecurity that I found was a public service announcement that was done in the mid 1980s by three of our politicians: Governor Terry Branstad, Senator Tom Harkin, and Senator Chuck Grassley. Now, these three people represent quite a spectrum politically, but they came together to say, You have to feed your families, and you should not be ashamed about what you have to do to feed your families. They talked about how, it's tax money that you paid that is funding food stamps. So you should not feel ashamed of doing what you need to do to feed your family. And, that you should think of food pantries as part of the long Iowa history of neighbors helping neighbors. And you should not be ashamed. You've given in the past, you should not be ashamed of taking now when you need it. And I have a hard time imagining a similar public service announcement being made today, but it was amazing to find that thing and to realize that these people who didn't agree about everything could agree that Iowans needed to take care of themselves and their families, and that was the most important thing, and that pride was not the most important thing. And I just loved that they were able to say that.
Right. There's such a lesson of hope there that maybe we can learn from. Dr. Riney-Kehrberg, thank you very much. I have a hunch we will have you back soon and often, I hope, to unpack some more history, some more of these lessons about food insecurity here in Iowa, and many things that we can learn from the past. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. And keep up the good work. We will keep in touch for sure. Thank you also to our viewers for tuning in. This is part of an ongoing series. If you have suggestions or for topics or questions, or if there are other people you would like to hear from, let us know. You can find more information about Iowa Stops Hunger online. And we will continue this discussion. So thank you very much to all of our sponsors, and for you for tuning in, and to Dr. Pamela Riney-Kehrberg from Iowa State. Take care.
This week's Hunger Insight is presented by Mom's Meals. Getting the right nutrition is essential to achieving and maintaining good health, but it isn't always easy to access the right foods. So how does that affect those living with chronic illness, especially individuals facing nutrition insecurity? Let's take a look at chronic illness. 93% of older adults in the U.S. live with at least one chronic condition. The most common and costly conditions include cardiovascular disease, chronic lung disease, diabetes, and kidney disease. These illnesses, along with cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's, drive the country's $4.9 trillion in annual healthcare costs. The good news? Each of these conditions can be prevented, managed, and treated with quality nutrition, using food as medicine. Unfortunately, many chronically ill individuals face barriers to nutritious food. Challenges like income, mobility, and transportation can lead to nutrition insecurity, which research shows is linked to poor health outcomes. Improving access to nutrition is vital. Nutritious, condition-appropriate meals can help people stay healthier, whether managing a chronic condition, recovering from an illness, or facing nutrition insecurity. Mom's Meals is setting the standard in the food as medicine space, with real-world results that show fewer hospitalizations, better A1C control, stronger medication adherence, and meaningful reduction in the total cost of care. When people are healthier, everyone benefits: individuals, families, and the healthcare system. From our start in Nevada, Iowa, to today, Mom's Meals delivers evidence-based nutrition solutions nationwide. And working together with our healthcare and community partners, we help people live healthier, longer lives. This week's Hunger Insight is presented by Mom's Meals.